James, you're one of our senior tech leads in the Grails space, and you've just done a couple of big projects using Grails as a tech stack. And one of the things that the technology report highlighted in the Grails space was that it's really well suited to customers who have a lot of investment in the JVM and Java infrastructure. Is that what you found on your customer projects too?
Absolutely. It was very well suited to projects and clients who had an existing Java team or existing Java projects deployed into the JVM on hardware suited for running a big, large-scale Java project. And Grails provided a very shallow learning curve for those clients and those projects to move into a more modern programming language, something that required a little less infrastructure, a little less plumbing code, and embraced more of the convention of a configuration.
So if we were looking at the attractions of Grails for an organisation that has a big investment in Java, we'd be looking at, first of all, the skills that their staff have, their developers have. We'd be looking at perhaps investments in knowledge of Hibernate and other libraries that they've been used to in the Java world and that they're able to leverage in the Grails.
I think that's it. It's not a stretch too far because a lot of these companies have come from either a JEE background before or embrace Spring and Hibernate, like you mentioned. Perhaps with a JSP front end. So the stretch into Grails then is not too big a one if you're delving into using the same technologies that they've known thus far. So Spring is at the back end. Hibernate sort of in disguise with Gorm, but provides sort of a nicer interface into Hibernate. And then GSPs, which are a much nicer form of JSPs anyway. And
my impression is that the Grails community is perhaps smaller, but just as enthusiastic as some of the bigger communities, such as Rails, perhaps.
I think so. Yes, there are a wealth of plugins out there, and they come in a couple of varieties, I suppose. Some are more community-oriented, and so they've come from developers or small code shops. And other ones are actually developed in-house by SpringSource, and so they're sort of labelled as ordained by SpringSource and developed in-house and also supported in-house. So with that, you get a few assurances that they'll be maintained over time with the various Spring versions as the technology evolves.
So if we were to summarise the benefits of Grails, then it's really well suited for organisations making a transition from, say, an investment in Java, wanting to keep the JVM infrastructure, so the operational knowledge around the JVM and perhaps the monitoring side of it operationally as well. People who have developers well versed in Java and perhaps a deep experience with Java libraries as well.
Yes, absolutely.
So if you look at the heritage of Grails and the emphasis on convention over configuration, is it fair to say that Grails is borrowing some of those concepts from the Rails side of things?
I think so, and I don't think it makes any attempt to hide that fact as well. It starts with the name, very similar names. Originally it was Groovy on Rails until the Rails community weren't too happy about that. So it definitely does, and I think you start to see a few of the parallels with the releases and progress that you see in Rails then coming over shortly after into Grails. And potentially some going the other way as well.
So what about from a testing point of view? Do you find on projects that you're able to borrow approaches for automated tests and CI from the Java heritage and bring that into the Grails space?
Absolutely. Grails, I think, is very test-friendly. It has inbuilt mechanisms for distinguishing between unit tests and integration tests, and there are a collection of plugins that help you then write functional tests as well to potentially drive things either through an API or through a web browser to test your web apps out. So any kind of JUnit experience would come in handy with any of those.
On one of our current projects, I know we're using CloudBees as a platform as a service for Grails app. Are you seeing that that's sort of a growing trend in the Grails space too, the emphasis on having those scriptable platforms as a service?
I think it is. I think it's starting to get there. Java platforms are sort of by their nature inherently a little bit more complex than, say, a Rails platform. But Amazon have released Beanstalk, and CloudBees, like you mentioned, have the ability to basically just drop in a WAR file as long as it's a compliant WAR file and potentially has the data source configured in it, then the rest of the environment can be set up from there. So yes, it's starting to see it. It's still, I think, in early days, but it's good to see it making progress.
So where do you see the Grails community heading? You know, what's next in the Grails space from your point of view?
I think starting to exploit some of the newer groovy features and some of the advancements in JDK 7 is where Groovy and Grails, I think, are really going to start to go from strength to strength. They've been held back a little bit thus far because of some performance issues, but I think the advances in those two technologies together should now really help to make it a much more mature technology stack from the language all the way through to the frameworks.
So taking those things and I guess summarising the benefits, it's really Grails gives you a path to that convention over configuration paradigm that's been popularised by Rails, but stay within that JVM space that perhaps you've invested a lot on in terms of skills and libraries and frameworks and internal components that you've developed.
Yes, indeed.